Welcome to the Global Current. This is Alicia Sharabali. First, Dina El Sayed reports on a shift in America's missile defense strategy.
A year after the Nuclear Security Summit in Seoul in March 2012, President Obama has followed through on his promise to wrap up the final stage of missile installation in Eastern Europe, postponing the program until 2022. The United States is currently refocusing its forces on deploying ground-based intercepts on the Pacific coast, balancing against North Korea. On March 15, 2013, North Korea test-fired short-range ballistic missiles in eastern waters in order to improve its technologies. The missile demonstration has been cited as a reaction to the UN sanctions levied against North Korea for conducting its third nuclear test earlier this year. The official American response came from Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, who announced 4 steps to strengthen homeland security. Among the announced steps include deployment of 14 ground-based interceptors at Fort Greely in Alaska. The interceptors, which should be fully operational by 2017, will raise the number of U.S.-based ground interceptors to 44 from its current 30 and boost U.S. missile defense capability by 50%, according to Pentagon officials. These developments come 1 year after President Obama met with his Russian counterpart Dmitry Medvedev to discuss Aegis anti-missile program in Eastern Europe. It was always a topic of disagreement between the two governments. Russia regarded the missiles in Poland and Romania as a threat to European missiles and homeland security. According to the recorded conversation from the meeting, Obama told Medvedev, on all these issues, but particular missile defense, this can be solved, but it's important for him to give me space. The U.S. president then said, "This is my last election. After my election, I have more flexibility." Announced Aegis Hyeros. Russia appears not to be entirely satisfied with U.S. decision. The Russian government has expressed its concern due to Alaska and Japan's proximity to Russian borders. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said, commenting on Americans' cancellation of 4th stage of Aegis program, "This is not the concession to Russia," he added. "I see no connection between Russia's objection to the deployment of U.S. missile defense system in Europe and the announcement made by the U.S. Defense Secretary. Therefore, our objection also remains in force." U.S. officials have made clear their belief that strategic cooperation between nations will benefit U.S., Russia, and NATO moving forward, though Russia remains wary of such partnership. U.S. officials have repeatedly stressed that its anti-ballistic missiles program is not directed against Russian nuclear missiles, but rather its attempt to balance the growing threats posed by North Korea and Iran. This was Dina El Sayed for the Global Current.
Tayo Akanji brings us the latest from the Eurozone financial crisis.
The last has not been heard on the financial crisis rocking the Eurozone. Cyprus, whose ailing banks pose the danger of bankruptcy to the country's financial sector, is the latest in the list of victims, just as it seemed the country had reached an agreement with EU officials on a 17.5 billion euros bailout, recapitalize the banks and save the country from ruin. The Cypriot parliament rejected the controversial plan, sending President Nikos Anastasiades to the drawing board to figure out a deal with European counterparts. In what had been an unprecedented bailout proposal, the EU financial managers and IMF officials sought to limit international contributions to 10 billion euros, while the remaining 7.5 billion euros would come from bank depositors in Cypriot banks. According to the terms of the deal, all account holders in Cyprus would be levied a one-time tax, with a percentage varying depending on the amount of funds held in the account. The controversial tax proved to be too much to stomach for the Cypriot people and their government. Details of the deal struck in Brussels on Saturday, March 16, emerged after a lengthy back-and-forth negotiation involving the IMF President Christine Lagarde, EU Central Bank, and Cypriot officials led by the newly elected President Nikos Anastasiades. According to Reuters, under the Saturday bank deal, bank deposits under 100,000 euros will face a levy of 6.7%, destroying the protection account holders thought they enjoyed on insured deposits up to that limit, while those above will be stung for 9.9%. German Chancellor Angela Merkel explained the reasoning behind the tax. Although President Anastasiades did sign off the bailout plan, it needed to receive approval from the Cypriot Assembly before it could be implemented. The bailout proposal was met with a resounding no from Parliament, sending Cyprus back to the drawing board. The Russian oligarch connection is another factor that has colored the deal. German intelligence indicates that a substantial amount of deposits in Cypriot banks belong to Russian oligarchs and mafia who are trying to escape heavy taxes at home or are trying to launder questionably earned money. Cypriot laws on money laundering are notably lax. The deal has continued to generate crisis and condemnation from within and outside the country. Cypriots have practically emptied the ATM machines over the weekend in a last-minute ditch to avoid a tax cut. This sparked a run that prompted banks to shut down entirely for at least the remainder of the week. The Russian President, Vladimir Putin, lashed out at the move on depositors' fund. Putin called the proposed levy unfair, unprofessional, and dangerous. Cyprus currently has the lowest corporate tax rate in the Eurozone. Extended conditions of the bailout may include raising corporate rates. As negotiations continue between local and international stakeholders, all eyes are on Cyprus to see how this crisis will be resolved. It has been Tayo Akonji for the Global Current.
Bjorn Schwarzenbach provides an optimistic perspective on new sanctions against North Korea, read by Zach Kotz.
Earlier this month, with a unanimous vote, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 2094, in which new sanctions limiting North Korean trade, banking, and travel were set in place. The resolution was passed amid annual military exercises on the Korean peninsula, an increasingly threatening rhetoric by North Korea aimed at the United States and South Korea. Resolution 2094 specifically addressed the February 12th underground nuclear test and condemned the DPRK's behavior in going ahead with the nuclear test. Resolution 2094 also addressed the proliferation of weapons technology, financial support of the regime and weapons industry, and illegal activities by North Korean diplomats and citizens. These wide-ranged yet equally effective sanctions have provided new tools for the international community to combat weapons proliferation, especially nuclear technology, by the DPRK. In addition to naming several DPRK companies associated with the weapons development program, the resolution went on to include more bans on nuclear and missile components on top of the already stated bans from Resolution 1718 implemented in 2006 in condemnation of the DPRK's first nuclear test. Furthermore, the resolution directly addressed the North Korean ruling elite, who, as U.S. Ambassador to the UN Susan Rice stated, quote, have been living large while impoverishing their people, will pay a direct price for this nuclear test, end quote. Specifically, the sale of jewelry and luxury transportation to the DPRK is banned under the resolution. An important factor in ensuring operative enforcement of Resolution 2094 is China's role in the region. The passing of Resolution 2094 proved its significance as China, which has the largest investment and relationship with North Korea as its external benefactor, negotiated and supported the assertive language of the text along with 14 other members of the UN Security Council. As former governor and U.S. presidential candidate Bill Richardson said, quote, China is part of a significant sanctions effort, and this may cool the North Koreans down, may temper their response. Along with statements by former high-ranking members of the DPRK leadership turned defectors, there have been increasingly more media reports of illegal activities in drug trade and money laundering often mimicking that of a mafia family. One main reason for illicit trading and money laundering by North Korea has been to gain hard currency for use at home. The funds are primarily used for the military and the powerful elite who live in the capital, Pyongyang. As Sheena Greitens from Harvard's Department of Government explains, the money is used by Kim Jong-un, quote, to pay off the small group of elite supporters, army generals, party, and family, end quote, in order to solidify his grip on power. An example of attempts to gain hard currency has been foreign tourism in the DPRK. While the specific details for where any tour revenue goes is unknown, one thing is certain. You generally cannot use Chinese yuan to go on a private tour. Instead, the tour company asks for payment in US dollars or euros. There is no linkage between the international financial system and North Korea, as there are no ATMs for foreign or domestic use in the DPRK. This forces any tourist to only bring in and use cash as forms of payment. Bringing hard currency into the country is then done by distributing transactions to the government by means of the various services offered for the tour, such as the travel and accommodations. Some argue that these tours allow the continued existence of the Kim family regime by funneling money into DPRK financial systems. Because of the increasing difficulty for banks to facilitate North Korean accounts, cash has still been difficult to obtain for the government. In 2006, under Section 311 of the Patriot Act, the United States forced Banco Delta Asia Bank, based in Macau, to discontinue service with all North Korean accounts and freeze upwards of $25 million. This, in addition to the recent UN-led sanctions imposing tighter restrictions for companies and financial accounts dealing with North Korea's weapons industry, have taken the next step in pushing North Korea towards denuclearization and forcing cooperation with the international community. Reporting for the Global Current, this has been Zach Kotz on behalf of Bjorn Schwarzenbach.
And now, Laura Toledo discusses the historic agreement reached at last week's Commission on the Status of Women at the United Nations.
Earlier this month, the 57th Commission on the Status of Women, known as CSW, resulted in an historic agreement on the priority theme of elimination and prevention of all forms of violence against women and girls. The outcome document was negotiated by all states and represents a giant leap forward in protecting women and advancing women's rights across the globe, providing accessible and affordable healthcare services, including sexual and reproductive health services such as emergency contraception and safe abortion, where such services are permitted by national law, is also called for in the agreement's text. These provisions were particularly contentious, especially for conservative Muslim and Roman Catholic countries. The Associated Press reports that Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, arguably the country's most powerful political faction, criticized the document for advocating sexual freedoms for women and the right to abortion, quote, under the guise of sexual and reproductive rights, end quote. Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Libya, Nigeria, and Sudan, along with Honduras and the Vatican, expressed similar reservations about the declaration. Though politically complicated and fraught with emotion, the right of bodily autonomy for women is essential to their advancement. When women have more control over family planning and readily available access to reproductive health services, they are able to develop themselves in a multitude of other ways. A 2009 report from Duke University states that women were empowered by enhanced family planning services to play a larger role in the family economy. Reproductive health education has long been known to reduce incidence of disease and unplanned pregnancies. Still, reproductive issues are only a small part of reducing violence towards women and girls. In many countries, tradition, culture, and religion have long shaped rights afforded to women. But declaring women's rights as human rights, Executive Director of UN Women, Michelle Bachelet, explains that it is time for established thought to grow and change. CSW 57's outcome document is momentous because of what seemed to be a trend of states' inability to negotiate and compromise on global issues. There has been no progress on the Kyoto Protocol, despite a huge push for action at Rio+20 held last summer. The World Trade Organization has been brokering an agreement for over a decade, stuck in the Doha round of trade negotiations. At last year's CSW, no agreement could be reached on a much less controversial theme: the empowerment of rural women and their role in poverty and hunger eradication, development, and current challenges. This led to a distinct lack of optimism for a conclusion to this year's agenda. But it seems to be that this negative feeling was not such a bad thing after all. Frustrated by a lack of progress, almost 300 organizations from all over the world signed on to a, quote, statement of feminist and women's organizations on the very alarming trends in the negotiations of outcome documents of the 57th session on the UN Commission on the Status of Women. By signing on to the agreed conclusions, governments around the world have pledged their commitment to make the world a better, safer, and more supportive place for our wives, mothers, daughters, and sisters. Implementation is sure to take time, but this agreement is just another step forward on the road to what Hillary Clinton knew as far back as 1995.
Let it be that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights once and for all.
This has been Laura Toledo for the Global Current.
Technical producer Heidi Erpson speaks for Olivia Colson about the tension between Buddhists and Muslims in Burma. Among the destruction of houses, mosques, and people, the ongoing ethnic violence in Burma has claimed another victim: the romantic notion of Buddhists held by those in the global West. The idea of a militant Buddhist may seem like an oxymoron, but in the newly democratizing country of Burma, it is the very people viewed as characteristically compassionate who are perpetuating the violence. The most recent outbreak in a long series of Islamophobic violence occurred early last week, when Buddhists in the city of Maikatila burned more than 1,000 buildings, killing 43 people, and displaced up to 12,000 Muslims from their homes. Muslims, who constitute only a small minority of the Burmese population, comprise under 5% of the country's 60 million inhabitants. As the official state religion, Buddhism is practiced by almost 90% of Burmese, although Buddhists and Muslims had peacefully coexisted in Burma for generations. The recent ethnic violence against Muslims has largely been blamed on a group of extremist Buddhist monks known as 969, whose name references Buddhist numerology. The leader of 969, Buddhist monk U Wirathu, has been in prison since 2003, but last year he was released by virtue of a presidential pardon. Since his release, Wirathu has spread anti-Muslim rhetoric and strongly urged the boycott of Muslim-owned businesses. In a speech posted online, Wirathu wrote, quote, "If you buy from Muslim shops, your money doesn't just stop there. It will eventually go towards destroying your race and religion. We must be careful. These Muslims really hate us." End quote. Wirathu and his campaign strongly urge Buddhist businesses to feature a sticker with the 969 logo in front of their operation. From obscurity to a familiar adornment in the windows of Buddhist businesses, these stickers have caught on, and the message they endorse is being gradually dispersed throughout Burma. Buddhist shops have yet to refuse service to Muslim patrons, but amid outbreaks of violence, tensions are high. Many Muslims have packed up and left their homes, while others close shops before dark, while plainclothes police monitor the streets. In a tense environment such as this, the littlest spark can ignite the flames of conflict. After an April 3rd fire that destroyed a mosque and killed 13 children, many officials worry that the tragic event could set the stage for violent riots. The cause of the fire remains unknown, although authorities suspect it was set deliberately. In a nationally televised speech, Burmese President Thein Sein issued a warning against political opportunists and religious extremists who might perpetuate the violence, saying, quote, "I will not hesitate to use force as a last resort to protect the lives and safeguard the property of the general public. It is unclear just how active and effective the transitioning government will be in containing ethnic conflict, or how the results of the fire investigation will affect religious relations. But it is painfully clear that the Muslims of Burma hold none of the same stereotypes about peaceful Buddhists that are familiarly etched in the Western psyche." As Michael Jarrison, a professor of religious studies at Eckerd College, reminds us, quote, "People are violent. It just so happens that some of these people are Buddhist." This has been Heidi Erbsen for Olivia Coulson for The Global Current.
Staffer Adam Bergdorf talks about the return of ancient artifacts to Kosovo and how it highlights the need for new strategies in combating the illegal antiquities trade.
This past February, Germany facilitated the return of 7 ancient artifacts to Kosovo. These antiquities had been confiscated by German police, who believed that the artifacts had been illegally exported from Kosovo and were to be sold on the black market. While the return of these artifacts serves as a cause for celebration in Kosovo, it also serves as a reminder of the endemic looting of cultural heritage that has existed since the war with Serbia. Countless instances of looting and destruction occurred during the conflict, the most significant of which occurred in 1999, when Serbia looted the National Museum in Pristina of over 1,200 exhibits under the guise of organizing a showcase exhibition in Belgrade. Serbia contends that it is the rightful owner of the exhibits, despite continued pressure from Kosovo and the European Union to return them to their rightful place. Since then, Kosovo has repeatedly requested that Serbia return the exhibits to the Pristina Museum, and the issue continues to prove a sticking point in talks between the two nations. The significance of this reminder was not lost on the Minister of Culture, Youth, and Sport, Mimli Krasniqi. At the ceremony welcoming the return of the 7 artifacts to Kosovo, Krasniqi took the opportunity to point out, quote, "This is an example to be followed by many countries, above all Serbia," adding, quote, "We will not withdraw our efforts to return the whole cultural treasure of our country, and we will only add our commitments to return the stolen artifacts." But this event also serves to highlight the continuing global problem of the illegal antiquities trade and illuminates the need of cooperation between source and market nations. Interpol estimates state the illicit market in antiquities in the billions of dollars. Unfortunately, recent conflicts have only added to the supply of antiquities on the black market. In the aftermath of the Iraqi invasion, the National Museum, as well as multiple archaeological sites around the nation, were ransacked and looted. Similar incidents followed the uprisings of the Arab Spring in Libya and Egypt. In addition, terrorist organizations such as Hamas and the Taliban have been utilizing the antiquities black market as a new source of revenue for their operations. Colonel Matthew Bagandos, who led the investigation into the Iraqi museum looting, stated, quote, "The terrorists realize that there is a new market and they have the right of first refusal on antiquities. We found that the same infrastructure that is used to smuggle weapons in and out of Iraq is also used to smuggle antiquities." This flood of illegal trafficking in antiquities and the explosion of the antiquities black market have made it clear that traditional source nation-based solutions are no longer viable. Export controls are simply too ineffective to stem the flow of antiquities from nations like Greece, Egypt, and Honduras. When market nations like the United States, Britain, France, Japan, and Switzerland have such a wide variety of buyers, from private collectors to museums and universities, willing to pay top dollar for these cultural treasures. The emphasis on solving the problem has now begun to shift to these market nations to control their appetites for illicit antiquities. Irina Bokova, the Director General of UNESCO, issued an official statement calling on antiquities dealers, collectors, and museums to take responsibility for checking the background of their purchases, insisting that, quote, "Gallery owners and representatives of auction houses make every effort to ensure that only cultural objects whose legal origin is indisputable are offered to buyers." The market nations have also taken steps to sign bilateral agreements, promising to control the trade of antiquities. Such an agreement was signed between Greece and the United States last year. Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton expressed optimism for the agreement's ability to combat illegal trafficking. A similar agreement between Kosovo and Germany was responsible for the coordination in identifying the stolen artifacts and facilitating their return. Antiquities and cultural heritage serve as reminders of humanity's shared history. They can serve as tools for growth for developing countries, and their illicit trade not only damages our collective knowledge, but also funds despicable organizations. No matter what reason you choose, it is important enough to demand international attention. Adam Bergdorf, Global Current.
Next up, Arjun Donde speaks about how the international community is reacting to North Korea's bellicose rhetoric.
Southeast Asia remains on high alert as the governments of North and South Korea continue to ramp up rhetoric and military posturing in response to escalating tensions between the two countries, once again embroiling the region, bringing the focus of the international community back to the Korean Peninsula. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea has combined rhetoric with action and begun to turn away all humanitarian, diplomatic, and other aid sent by the Republic of Korea's new president, Park Geun-hye. The North has also begun to close entry points into Kaesong Industrial Park, which is located in North Korea along the border and shared between the two countries. While factories remain open for the time being, the developments in Kaesong Complex, which is a considerable source of income for the DPRK, epitomize the two nations' souring relations. According to South Korea's Yonhap news agency, the DPRK regime is threatened by the posture of the United States and her allies, and is taking steps to address the issue, among them being the use of its improved missile system, which the DPRK claims are needed for self-defense. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who hails from South Korea, shared his concerns in an address to the UN.
I'm deeply troubled. As a Secretary General, it is my duty to prevent war and to pursue peace. It is also my responsibility to state that the current crisis has already gone too far.
Ban stated that the current cycle of action has gone too far and denounced the further use of nuclear threats, aggressive rhetoric, and military posturing, which he said does little but cause fear and lead to instability. Ban assured the DPRK that no nation had any intention of attacking, though noted that nations retained the right to reprisal should North Korea decide to make good on its threats. Other actors in Southeast Asia have sent clear signals about where they stand. In a show of strength and solidarity with its ally, the U.S. began scheduling joint military drills with South Korea, which has included bolstering existing naval forces and flying nuclear-capable B-2 stealth fighters and non-stealth B-52 bombers. In an interview with The Independent, Russia Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov irritated Russia's concern that alongside the adequate collective reaction of the United Nations Security Council, unilateral action is being taken around North Korea that is increasing military activity. One of the more unexpected reactions could be seen through China's response. Though a longtime ally of North Korea, China has joined the members of the international community that have expressed disdain and concern for North Korea's recent actions towards the South. Despite a seemingly more conciliatory mood around this time, China has remained firm in its resolve to prevent any action against North Korea by the United States or its allies. Arjun Donde, Global Current.
And now, staffer Bilal Bahadur brings us up to date on the recent events in Palestine and Israel.
Tensions rise after militant rockets are exchanged with Israeli airstrikes in Gaza. According to the Irish Times, Israeli aircraft warplanes targeted the Gaza Strip in response to several rockets fired towards southern Israel by Palestinian militants. These attacks were, quote, the heaviest exchange of fire between the sides since the ceasefire ended, a major flare-up last year, said Ian DH of Associated Press. There were no reports of casualties as the attacks were on open land in northern Gaza. According to the BBC, correspondent John Dennison said that neither Israel nor Hamas are thought to want another escalation in violence, but it is a reminder that the ceasefire is fragile and that underlying conflicts remain. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu promised that there will be a rather defensive strike if the fire coming from, quote, Hamas-controlled enclaves do not cease. He stated, quote, if the lull is violated, we will respond vigorously, adding, quote, the security of Israel's citizens tops my concerns, and we will know how to defend the security of our citizens. Israel's new defensive minister, Moshe Ya'alon, said, quote, we will not allow shooting of any sort towards our citizens and our forces. As he responded to the incidents, Ya'alon blamed Palestinian faction Hamas, the elected authority over Gaza since 2007, for the attacks, even though Hamas has not claimed any responsibility for the attacks, according to a comprehensive analysis by Al Jazeera. Ihab Hussein, the Hamas government spokesman, accused Israel of using the airstrike to, quote, divert attention from the unrest in Israeli prisons. Violence in the West Bank erupted immediately after the death of 63-year-old Maysara Abu Hamdiyya from esophageal cancer. The Palestinian Authority blamed Israel for Hamdiyya's death by medical negligence. However, Israeli officials say they went through normal medical protocols. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas told Fatah leaders in Ramallah, quote, in the past we tried to work to get him released from prison so he could receive proper medical treatment, but the Israeli government refused to comply with our efforts. According to the Jerusalem Post, quote, Hamdiyya was given a life sentence by Israel in 2002 with charges of attempted murder, membership in a banned organization, and illegal possession of firearms as a result of his role in a thwarted restaurant bombing in Jerusalem's German colony. Palestinians praised Hamdiyya as a martyr and a hero, and his death caused violence to erupt. According to the IDF, Palestinians threw Molotov cocktails at a guard station near Tel Karam on Wednesday night. A senior defensive source told the Jerusalem Post that those firebombs made the soldiers feel that their lives were at risk, which was their reason for retaliating with live fire. The sequence of events comes days before Secretary of State John Kerry is scheduled to visit Jerusalem and weeks after President Obama was in the area. Kerry plans to meet with both sides to restart peace talks. U.S. officials have said he will be listening for new ideas on how to break the 4-year deadlock. More than 160 Palestinians and 6 Israelis were killed in 8 days of fighting last November when similar events occurred. The Guardian said that defense official Amos Jalad dismissed any suggestions that a third popular uprising or an intifada was breaking out in the West Bank, especially since the territory seized in the 1967 war now houses more than 340,000 settlers. The article further states that Israel was responding to, quote, a group linked to Al-Qaeda called Majlis Shurat al-Mujahideen after the group responded to Abu Hamdiyya's death by firing 2 rockets on Wednesday. More recently, thousands of Palestinians stormed the streets of the West Bank on Thursday, protesting and joining the funeral processions of 2 young protesters that were killed by Israeli troops. The youths, 17-year-old Amir Nasser and 18-year-old Najib al-Bisi, were killed when Israeli troops opened fire, responding to the firebombing attacks on Israeli checkpoints near Tel Karam in the northern West Bank. President Mahmoud Abbas said that Israel's use of lethal force showed that it wants to, quote, provoke chaos in the Palestinian territories. These events placed the peace deals between Palestine and Israel on shaky grounds. UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East, Richard Sari, said it was of, quote, paramount importance to refrain from violence. He added that violations of the ceasefire threatened to destroy the Egyptian brokered agreement that would see Israel ease its blockade on Gaza. In the meantime, Israel has deployed an Iron Dome battery near Eilat due to concerns that more rockets may be fired from terror groups in the Sinai to Israel's south. Reporting for the Global Current, Bilal Bahadur.
And that's all for this week's show. Be sure to check us out online at blogs.shu.edu/globalcurrent, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This has been Alicia Sharbali for the Global Current. Have a great one.